Hi, this is Nick Martin and welcome to the WorkshopBank Podcast, where I'm joined today by a guy who's on the other side of the world in warm and sunny Perth, Australia. He's just told me it's 36 degrees outside, which for me in Copenhagen sounds very nice indeed. Paul reached out to me after session 2 that I did with Alex Nairn on dynamic facilitation. Which is great. I mean, I encourage anyone to do the same. If you've got a story to tell, an interesting story to tell, or a tool to talk about, or a process that you're obsessed with and you think I should know about it so I can help you broadcast that out to the world, then get in touch. If it interests me, then it's definitely going to interest my audience, I hope. Paul is going here to teach me today about a technique called dialogue mapping. He is one of only 4 qualified dialogue mappers in the world today. He's written an award-winning book called The Heretic's Guide to Best Practices, which has won a bronze award at the 2012 Axiom Business Book Awards this year. So welcome, Paul. Welcome to WorkshopBank.
Thanks, Nick. Good to be here.
Good stuff. So before we jump into it, it'd be great to get your what are your thoughts on WorkshopBank and what I'm trying to do here.
Oh, I love it. It was I came across it because I actually looked at the video podcast that Alex did. So then I had a bit of a poke around the site, and because I'm a nerd for different workshop approaches and techniques. So I immediately started surfing around to have a look at some of those ones, and some of the ones you have listed there, I thought, I've dialogue mapped that kind of workshop, so I thought I have to get in touch with this guy. Yeah. So that was basically how it came to be.
Well, thank you very much for doing so. So tell me what dialogue mapping is, and tell me how you got so obsessed with it.
Dialogue mapping is, if anyone that's watched Alex's podcast on dynamic facilitation. It's got a lot of similarities to that, although it doesn't involve flip charts. But if you were to listen to a lot of what he said, it's very similar in intent, structure, and philosophy, really. So it's basically a workshop or facilitation method that involves using some software as opposed to flip charts. So things are captured digitally. And what I do as a dialogue mapper is I'm really at the front of the room. There'll be a group of people that I'm facing, and behind me there'll be a big, hopefully a really large projector screen. And so as people talk, I visually capture their rationale in a notation, very easy to understand notation, up on the wall in a visual form. So being software, one of the sort of advantages, I guess, it saves some of the heavy lifting of flip charts, because it's wonderful that you can delete something when you've made an error or something like that. So in that way, it's designed for a group to develop a shared understanding of a problem that they're coming to grips with by making their rationale much more clear to each other by putting it in a visual form on a shared display.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. So. And what does the output look like that you get to at the end? What kind of elements does it have, and then what can you do with it?
So superficially, it looks a bit like a mind map, and that's the most common thing I get. Oh, that's the kind of mind map, but of course, as a dialogue mapper, you go, no, it's a dialogue map, completely different thing. And that's because it uses there is a notation. There's a number of icons and symbols, and so there's 4 basic node types. So when I capture rationale, I capture one of 4 things. I get a question, an idea, and a pro and a con. And so the idea being that you put the question up, people will suggest ideas or things that they think might address the question, and pros basically support that idea, say that why it's a good thing. Cons argue against that idea, why it may be a bad thing. And you basically iterate and you build upon it that way. But if you could picture it right now, since we're not looking at it, it's basically a mind map with a very simple icon set that means people can kind of instinctively read it and grasp what's being put up there without having to have the whole thing explained to them.
Okay, so that's an important point. So for the participants, they don't need to have gone through a rigorous set of training to be able to participate successfully in a session like this. What do they need to bring to the table?
They need to bring their passion and their wisdom. Basically, there is nothing else. So the only person that needs any expertise is the mapper.
Yeah.
I've studied a lot of different workshopping methods. Like I said, I'm kind of a nerd for workshopping techniques. And the more that you have to sort of lay out a preamble or a whole bunch of conceptual scaffolding just to run the workshop, to me that takes people away from the real work of getting stuff done.
Yeah.
So I like the elegant methods that are just sort of intuitive, they're graspable, they're sort of immersive, and people just, the time sort of flies by, and people say wow, and capturing it digitally also means that a click of a button you can generate reports and sort of close the loop on producing meaningful output from it. So there's a lot of efficacy in the process too.
Well, that's quite nice, isn't it? And that's certainly something you don't get from dynamic facilitation, because you've got to type up those flip charts and try and make sense of the order. And so do you get to a different point? I mean, do you reach the same? Does it have the same benefits as dynamic facilitation? Do you get the same output, or do you go on in a slightly different direction?
It is very similar, and you get similar outputs, and it's for similar kind of workshops. So Alex made the point of dynamic facilitation is designed for really complex problems, polarizing problems. I use the term wicked problems, which was coined by a guy named Horst Rittel in the 70s. And the notation that we use in this particular approach was actually conceived by Horst Rittel in 1970, circa pen and paper. Now, of course, in the modern era of high-powered projectors, laptops and graphical display, it's certainly come a long way since then.
Yeah.
But yeah, so.
Okay. And
so I think that's.
And something that Alex talked about in session 2 was that. When he does a dynamic facilitation session, he quite often. Am I coming through okay? Because you're starting to break up on me a little bit. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, fine.
Good. When he runs a dynamic facilitation session, he quite often doesn't explain the process that they're about to go through, because he doesn't want the process to get in the way of the discussion. Is that a similar approach to what you take in dialogue mapping, or? Do you just break out the dialogue map and then crack on?
Yeah, I completely agree with what he said, and I like that a lot, because it's one of these things that you have to sort of experience, and so to try and set expectations around, we're going to use this wonderful, really this really innovative method called dialogue mapping. I just don't do that at all. I walk in, I tell people that I take notes on the laptop. This is if I'm, if it's coming in first time, and more often than not, just about every meeting room has a projector, and I'll say that, look, if I plug in, at least everyone can see what I'm doing, and if we're going to go off away and take some action based on this, at least you can see that I've captured things accurately.
Yeah.
Fast forward 2 hours from that, and most people are then at the end saying, "Wow, what is that software you're using?" And so that's usually a sign that it's had its effect.
Yeah. Okay. So you just let the process speak for itself, and people just naturally love it. What is it that they love about it? Why do they feel?
Basically, there's a couple of reasons, I think. Firstly, because you're capturing everything visually, you're acknowledging everyone's contribution. So everything is acknowledged. I don't put who said it. I don't weight things. I simply capture if it's an idea, it's an idea. If it's a con, it's a con. If it's a pro, I put it up as a pro. So everyone gets heard. That has a very, just that alone has a really important effect. It stops serial repetition. So you would have no doubt experienced the guy or person who they've got the solution, and it doesn't matter where the conversation goes, they'll bring it back and say, look, if only you considered this solution, everything would be great. And so it drives everyone else nuts, and we're all guilty of doing it, by the way. Yeah. Because you've acknowledged it and you put it up visually, you've captured the rationale. If they actually did that, and they never do, as the mapper, you could say, is there anything else I need to add to what I've captured here? So it tends to make meetings more efficient. You don't go over the same old ground straight away. It also deals with the whole short-term memory thing, because the other thing that we've all done, and I'm sure everyone's guilty of this, you're in a meeting, you zone out for maybe 10 minutes, the conversation's kind of moved on, and you sort of jolt back into reality, and you're thinking to yourself, oh crap, I hope they don't ask me anything, because I have no idea where we're on now. But when you've captured it visually, one speaker might go to a previous point or a previous idea, another person might go to a different idea, and so you don't have the problem of, well, that's not on the agenda, sorry. You can admit all the viewpoints in a really quite efficient way, and you're building a shared context. You're developing this one shared display that gives you a good representation of the problem in this rationale, question, idea, pro, con. It's literally, it's taking speech as it's uttered and making a navigable structure to it.
Yeah.
And so that's really quite powerful, and it's also very engaging for people too.
Yeah.
So like where dynamic facilitation has a facilitator that's the focal point, and the way to address the means of dealing with different stakeholder viewpoints and that sort of thing, the map is actually the focal point as opposed to the facilitator.
Okay. Wow, that's amazing. So what types of problems can it be used on? What have you done? What have you done that's it's so much easier to think about real examples. So if we could try and talk about a real case study, and you talk through the dynamics of the session and how it ran at each particular point, that would be really helpful.
Okay, sure. I'll take 2 minutes just to explain the history of how I got into this, because that's an important context here. What happened was, I wouldn't call it my day job, but about half of the stuff I do these days is IT. So I was, in a similar way to your very first podcast, I'm a similar kind of person. And the product I specialize in has a high tendency to fail. Not because the product's bad, because the way it's put in.
Right.
And I discovered the term wicked problem, and it pretty much described everything I'd experienced in projects. And so I Googled, how do you deal with wicked problems? I come across dialogue mapping, and really all I wanted was something to basically make these projects suck less, to put it bluntly. I took it up, I learnt it, went to the US and learnt it. I came back, and then a guy in Perth where I live, who I'd never met, contacts my mentor in California who taught me, saying, is there anyone in Perth that does what you do? We have this really wicked problem. It was in urban planning and roads. It was to do with a interchange. It was the classic urban planning is usually this.
So nothing to do with IT whatsoever?
Oh, absolutely not. So I was petrified, of course. But basically, urban planning is very much, you want to build a livable city. You need amenity. It has to be a great place. It has to have complete intergenerational sort of thing. You want grandma living there, the kids, the students, the whole diverse mix. You want to make it a green city, so you want to reduce the environmental footprint, and then you want to remediate all the planning mistakes of the past. Compared to that, then you've got there's probably a few highways nearby that carry a whole lot of traffic that are almost at gridlock now. And so the road engineers will say, well, we've done our modelling and this is going to be gridlock in 5 years, we need more lanes. And then the planners will say, yeah, but it's hard to have a nice amenable city with a 8-lane highway going through the middle of it. Yeah. And so this is seriously what I got dropped into after just being an IT guy doing requirements analysis. And so there was about 20 people in the room, so this was a lot. And so being in IT for 20 years, I don't really get intimidated by too much anymore. I've kind of got to that point where you sort of, I guess, plateau or that skill set is enough.
Yeah.
The thought of going in.
Who was in the room? What type of people?
There were community development people, environmental people, freeway specialists, town planners. Okay, so
a broad, people, all the stakeholder groups that. Okay.
Yeah, and they had actually been meeting for 18 months prior, and they were pretty deadlocked too. So this was one of those things where they just thought they'd try it. I went in there and thought I'd completely died, because this was a whole level of... And even Jeff Conklin's the guy who invented dialogue mapping. When I said to him, here's the situation and here's what I'm going into, so imagine I'm really green at this, and he says, yeah, that's a big challenge. And so I'm thinking, oh my God, my mentor has told me that... So anyway...
Mentors can't say that. That's not fair.
Yeah. So what happened was, though, there were just a few moments in there where I got it right, and really I captured what was said, and they got to a point. They had a couple of breakthroughs, and they were able to get to a point where they could draw up a topographic map or a geospatial map, put it on the wall, and actually get a marker pen and draw what the plan might be. And they'd never got to that point before, so they called me back. And we did it again, and we ended up doing 6 workshops. And we were able to pull out a whole bunch of options, which then went through the the classic, what they call in planning, value management, inquiry by design, and they managed to get their preferred long-term transport option. So that was my first experience of true wicked problem. And in fact, horse ritual wicked problem, the term wicked problem came from urban planning, and I went back to IT thinking to myself, man, IT is easy compared to what these guys have to deal with. And really it went from there. And it was just people in that room. Probably for 6 months it was pretty quiet, but people in that room sort of went back to business as usual, went into a BAU kind of situation and thought, yeah, that mapping thing was pretty good. I think I might try that. And so over time people started calling. And of course, over time, we got better at it and had more case studies and did some fairly innovative things. And so the net result is 5 years later, we've done case studies in health, like mental health, urban planning, strategic plan development, relationship building, all sorts of things that if you'd have told me 5 years ago that would happen, I would have laughed at you because, again, my intent was just to make my IT projects better. But as a result, we've sort of fallen into this kind of this really interesting area of sense making, and it definitely works.
So you're obviously using it as also in your IT projects as well. And you're finding your failure rate is lower now as a result, or absolutely. I can. Well, what a test of that is we haven't made anyone mad yet since we've done it. So and we've grown in the IT stuff has grown considerably. So, but you know something, the IT stuff's easy. All IT projects are not hard. It's always the technology is never the issue. It's all the other stuff. And so now and that's the bit that technologists, that's kind of a blind spot that they tend to have, with the exception of guys like your first podcast. And who are
so as you
both
start
the people and the technical side.
Precisely. And so I say to people quite a lot, the product I specialize in is called SharePoint, by the way, which does have a propensity to bring out every dysfunction in organization that exists, but it'll bring it to the surface. And I say to people a lot, I've learned more about how to do SharePoint delivery from sitting in a room doing urban planning or strategic planning than ever doing IT projects. So I really love the ability to sort of go off and do like a really complex, an organization that's, the whole ground has shifted from under it and they have to completely realign themselves and restructure to deal with a new challenge. That's fun stuff. And so when you go back after doing that into SharePoint, it's by comparison, it's what I thought was complex back then. Now I've seen that quite a bit. You want complex, go and see what planners do, that sort of thing.
Can I just take you back to your case study? So they'd been talking as a group, as a group of 20 people for 18 months before you walked into the room, and then after only 6 workshops, they'd made a major breakthrough.
And actually,
go on.
I was just going to say, you used the word they, and that's really important because it wasn't me. I mean, all I did was put a bunch of rationale up on the wall for them to see. So the thing about dialogue mapping, you're not solving the problem for them. You are there simply to frame the problem in a way that everyone can grasp and hopefully can, Jeff Conklin says most projects fail because of lack of shared understanding. If you don't have shared understanding, you'll never have shared commitment to a course of action to see it through. And you can tell projects that don't have a shared commitment because they tend to fall away. The momentum's lost. So you've got to get shared understanding. And so that's a whole different way of looking at things, because most project managers go, how do I get this damn thing in scope? Whereas I started saying to myself, how do I get a shared understanding of the problem here? And so I just wanted to emphasize that I'm not doing anything special, really. It's the collective wisdom of everyone in the room. All I'm doing is putting it on the wall on a shared display in a way that everyone can see.
And so you think that, they've been sitting around a table, I assume, for 18 months, having having probably the same conversation that they had in front of you.
Yes.
Except they just weren't able to see it developing in front of them.
They didn't have the holding environment necessary and so in the book I wrote, we use the term holding environment, which we borrowed from a guy named Heifetz, who's famous for a book called The Practice of Adaptive Leadership. And so adaptive problem, wicked problem, same kind of thing. And so the holding environment is basically providing what really it boils down to participation, safety, and decision influence. If you can create those two conditions, you'll get movement in groups. And so a holding environment is both, because I also do stuff these days with other facilitators, and you might talk to him, hopefully, one guy that I mentioned to you.
Yeah, yeah, thanks for that.
The holding environment is both psychological and technological. And so the dialogue mapping is a piece of technology that serves to align people and give a shared display and a shared focus. But there is a facilitative skill. You don't just sit there and stenographer type in. You're interacting with people, you're clarifying points, you're doing everything the dynamic facilitation practitioner does. You're just using a different tool.
Okay.
But it's that same kind of skill set that Alex was talking about is very applicable in dialogue mapping.
Yeah, okay. And the thing I liked about dialogue mapping as a facilitator is that I already know how to use a pen and a flip chart, and there were only 4 flip charts, and I can hold a discussion. I don't find it too difficult to listen to what I'm hearing and transcribe that onto a piece of paper whilst the discussion continues. But I'm picturing now me putting a computer in front of myself, and even though I'm reasonably IT literate, holding the discussion whilst playing around with the tool, using a tool, trying to work out whether things are ideas or problems or pros or cons. That must take a bit of practice. Is that quite a difficult skill? How long does that take?
Well, funnily enough, you've already got the most important skill that you need. So there's 3 stages to dialogue mapping mastery, the way from my experience. So you're completely correct. The first one is the software that I use, which is free, by the way. It doesn't cost anything. It's called Compendium, if anyone wants to Google that.
Yeah, I'll include a link below the video.
Okay, excellent. So Compendium, I think, if you're IT savvy, it's probably 30 minutes to pretty much get your head around it, and a couple of days, and by that stage it no longer gets in the way. So that's stage 1. You got to get to a point of proficiency where the software is not in the way. Helps, and by the way, I'm a 2-finger typist, a dyslexic 2-finger typist, and I can do it. So that's obviously not everything. The second stage, as you said, was if you're sitting there going, "Oh, is this a pro or is this an idea?" Like that sort of thing. That's the mastery of the notation, which is called IBIS, by the way. I should have mentioned that. If someone Googles it, it was called Issue-Based Information System. Yeah. That's correct. So because there's only 4 nodes, it might seem pretty straightforward, but like all grammar, there's different ways of doing it. I teach a class on that, and by the end of the 2-day class, most people have pretty much got the IBIS thing down, and so that then sort of gets slotted into the reptile brain.
Yeah.
When you've got those things down, that's when you learn how to facilitate.
Right.
And so, I learnt in the order I'm telling you, whereas if you're already an experienced facilitator, and I've taught experienced facilitators, and you can just see the difference, in terms of people that have that skill. So for me, that was the hardest skill to master, and that's something that I've learnt through osmosis, because quite often in big groups, we've done groups up to 50. I work with a number of facilitators where I map and I co-facilitate and map while they direct traffic and that sort of thing. And these guys are amazing facilitators, way in excess of what I can do. Nevertheless, I've managed to learn some of the. I've seen what they do, and you slowly your tacit knowledge increases. Yeah, you pick up the little subtleties, all of that sort of stuff. So basically, the things that you were thinking were the hardest bits for me are actually the easiest bits. It was the art of holding a group, facilitating a conversation that's actually for me the hardest bit. Okay,
so that's encouraging. So you can come at this from either angle, whether if you're an already experienced facilitator, you can just learn the software. If you just want to learn the software first and then become a facilitator, that works too. And you are proof.
Absolutely.
Being one of
I'm living proof of that one.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm also living proof that you don't have to you can map a discipline completely foreign to you as well. You don't have to have discipline knowledge to be able to map it once you get proficient with the question, idea, pro, con, because you can hear the patterns in the conversation that's going on, and So, for example, an inexperienced mapper, just a quick one, a lot of times someone will say things like, an idea is presented, and someone will say, well, what do you think so-and-so would say about that? And it's a rhetorical question, right? But here's the thing: it's not a question, and you would not put that up as a question. That's a con. You just haven't unpacked what that con is yet. They're inferring there's an issue with it, and so the sort of as you get better at it, you start to pick those patterns up, and so your maps have a lot of coherence, and so it's a listening skill that you're developing, and you can almost anticipate questions. You know that a criterial question will come up, and you know how to handle that in the map, right? Yeah.
That's interesting. So it's almost, there's a skill in there when you're creating the map of knowing what to leave out as well, and wait for something for a pro or con to develop, because one's around the corner, rather than just typing absolutely everything that is said to you. Yes,
and you are absolutely spot on with that, and that's the listening facilitator skill that someone like yourself would actually find easy to transition. For you, it would just be a muscle memory thing of A, the software, and then B, the notation. But that's exactly right. I don't map everything madly. And that's something I've developed over time as my listening skills and my understanding of the patterns of conversation have improved. I've learned when I don't need to map. And in fact, there's a good point that Jeff Conklin makes, and I've also lived this too. Sometimes you don't map. There are some times where and particularly an open space can bring this out, but sometimes a conversational something that's been glossed over for a while, a pain point is being brought up. There are times when actually you just close the laptop and do whatever you can to get out the way and let the conversation happen, particularly if it's sort of a healing conversation, which I've experienced in open space scenarios. So there are times when you just put the laptop down and get out the way.
Yeah.
So that's important, knowing when not to map as well.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, we were debating before this podcast whether we do a demonstration of it, and I am kind of itching to have a crack at that. But what we'll try and do, if you're up for it, Paul, is to close out this podcast element, close out the audio element, and then we'll switch into a screen sharing, which will be part of the podcast page. So. You'll have heard at the beginning of the podcast what number podcast session. It's probably going to be podcast number 5, so it'll probably be workshopbank.com/session5. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, then I encourage you to go to that page, because there's going to be another video below this, hopefully, if Paul agrees, where we're going to show you what dialogue mapping actually looks like, and we're going to have a facilitated conversation. But before I do that, I'd just like to mention your book and talk about your book and ask you how you managed to weave both the Borg and Willy Wonka into what could be a boring, dry business book, but it's obviously not.
So basically, the way that sort of came about, I've had a blog for a long time, and I've always liked writing anyway. Just even as a kid, I quite like writing. So I guess I've sort of found my childhood, just that sort of thing I enjoyed. So I have a sort of a dry, kind of subversive sense of humor. And someone told me a long time ago, I do a lot of training, and the more outrageous or the more ridiculous you make it, the more it will stick. And so I kind of pride myself on trying to take a complex topic and coming up with the most ridiculous metaphor that actually gets the topic across.
Yeah.
And so the Heretics Guide book was really, I'd learnt a lot of this stuff. I sort of had met a kindred spirit in Kailash, my co-author, and he has an amazing blog, and he has 2 PhDs. He spent 15 years in what he terms the cloistered world of academia before he got out and became a consultant and project manager.
Wow, 2 PhDs, that's incredible.
Oh yeah, he's a smart guy. He's definitely the brains of the pairing, but his rigor appealed to me. I just love the rigor that he had, and he liked my writing style. I'm a more kind of, I'll find a weird metaphor, or like hell, I'll put in a fart joke if it will get the point across. And so we decided we'd write this book together, and it was a completely emergent book. We just sort of saw where it would go, and so in the end, we were pretty happy with it. It was a nice blend of rigor with sort of pop culture. I find pop culture is something that people sort of gets across really well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we've got the Borg, Willy Wonka, Megadeth, couple of Ben Stiller movies. There's a bit of Star Wars in there. So yeah, you have to excuse that's part of the IT guy still left in me. There's a bit of Big Bang Theory nerdiness in there, I guess. But the aim was to basically make it rigorous, but make it accessible, and hopefully people will find that we've done that.
And what are the things you're covering? What are the key messages in the book that you're talking about?
So basically, we spend part one going through all of the various reasons why really dumb things happen in organizations, and we kill a few sacred cows along the way. So, certain project managers might find it slightly uncomfortable reading. So if anyone's ever been an agitator in their organization and they don't have the ammo to really go up against the machine, then this book you could be completely rational and completely deconstruct certain established views. However, you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So it's not a anti-establishment sort of book. It's just saying that there are certain times when these established tools work really well. You've got to understand that, and there are times when the emergent type approaches work well.
Yeah.
We then go into, so part two is what to do about it. So it's not just dialogue mapping, but by the way, I do a few other things apart from that. But dialogue mapping is the foundation. So we talk about this idea of the holding environment, what it takes to hold the space. We talk about some of the technological things. We talk about some of the visual notation, how to frame problems. And one chapter that I'm particularly happy with is dealing with issues like there's a particular type. This is a separate conversation to today, but just to give you a sense that in Australia there's a particular type of contract for delivering projects that's completely collaborative, and it's a very clever way of dealing with certain things that none of the facilitation techniques can address, which is issues of power when someone pulls rank. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good the facilitator is, if someone doesn't want to go somewhere, they won't go somewhere. So we have a chapter on that, and then we go into case studies where that's the story I just told you, the urban planning one, got more case studies in that area, a couple of IT ones, and a few reflections on that, plus some reflections on dialogue mapping and what it takes to practice it and that sort of stuff. So that's pretty much 420 pages of riveting goodness, basically.
Sounds fantastic. Well, I haven't read it yet, but it's on my list of to-dos over Christmas, and I'm looking forward to getting stuck into it, especially if it's entertaining. And any kind of mention of Star Trek is good for me, because I'm a little bit of a nerd as well. So that's all good. Good stuff. Well, Paul, really good to meet you. And as I said, we're gonna try and do a demonstration of dialogue mapping after this, probably as a separate video on the podcast page. So if you are listening to this, then go to workshopbank.com/session5, and there'll be a video there where you can see, and hopefully you'll get a really good demonstration of what dialogue mapping is all about. But I'm looking forward to it, because it's going to be about a topic close to my heart. Excellent.
All right, cool. I'm up for that.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.